The woman they called a ghost. The night Caleb Turner walked into Lin Yu's shop, he was looking for medicine. What he found was a woman the entire town had tried to erase, a widow they whispered about but never saw, a foreigner they feared but never knew. She stood behind her counter surrounded by dried herbs and flickering lamplight, her hands steady even as the blizzard screamed against the walls. Their eyes met across that small room, and something shifted. Two people who'd learned to survive alone suddenly wondering if they had to. But in a town built on judgment, wanting wasn't enough. Surviving together would cost them everything. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far Lin Yue and Caleb's story travels. And if you believe love can break through fear, hit that like button and stay until the end. The blizzard hit Ridgefield on Christmas Eve like a fist through glass. It came without warning, the kind of storm that turned the Wyoming frontier into a white grave within hours. Caleb Turner barely made it to the edge of town before the wind started tearing at his coat, before the snow turned the world into a wall he couldn't see through. His horse stumbled twice on the main road, hooves sliding on ice that hadn't been there an hour before. He should have stayed at the ranch. He knew that, but the silence out there had been eating him alive for weeks. And tonight, Christmas Eve, the night his wife used to fill their home with cedar boughs and cinnamon, tonight the silence felt like dying. So he'd ridden into town with no plan, no destination, just the desperate need to be somewhere his memories couldn't follow. Now he was paying for it. The temperature had dropped so fast his breath froze before it left his mouth. His fingers were numb inside his gloves. The few buildings he could make out through the snow were already dark, their windows shuttered against the storm. Ridgefield rolled up early on good nights. On a night like this, it vanished. Caleb urged his horse forward, squinting through the white chaos for anything, a stable, a store, somewhere to wait out the worst of it. The animal beneath him was shaking, exhausted and half blind from the wind. Another few minutes and they'd both be done. Then he saw it, a light, faint, golden, barely visible through the sheets of snow. But it was there, steady and warm, coming from a small building at the far end of the street. He didn't recognize the place at first. Ridgefield wasn't big, but Caleb hadn't been paying attention to much of anything in the years since Sarah died. He'd stopped seeing the town, stopped seeing most things, but he saw that light. He dismounted, his boots sinking deep into snow that was already past his ankles, and led his horse toward it. The building was narrow, wedged between a shuttered feed store and an empty lot. A painted sign hung above the door, swinging violently in the wind. He couldn't read it through the snow, but he didn't care. If there was someone inside, they might let him wait until the storm passed. He tied his horse to a post and pushed the door open. Warmth hit him first, then the smell, sharp and earthy, unfamiliar but not unpleasant. Herbs. Dried plants hanging in bundles from the ceiling, scattered across a long wooden counter, filling jars on shelves that lined the walls. The room was small, barely large enough for two people to stand without touching, but it felt alive in a way the rest of the town didn't. And standing behind the counter, her hands sorting through a tray of dried roots, was a woman. She looked up as he stepped inside, and for a moment neither of them moved. Caleb had heard about her. Everyone in Ridgefield had. The widow who'd taken over the old apothecary shop after her husband died. The Chinese woman who kept to herself, who didn't speak much, who the townspeople whispered about in the way people whispered about things they didn't understand and didn't want to. He'd never seen her before, never had a reason to. But now, standing in her shop with snow melting off his coat and the storm howling outside, he couldn't look away. She was younger than he'd expected. 30, maybe? Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple braid, and her face was calm, unreadable. She wore a plain gray dress, the sleeves rolled to her elbows, and her hands, small, careful hands, didn't stop moving even as she studied him. "The storm," Caleb said finally, his voice rough from the cold. I just need to wait it out." She didn't answer right away. Her eyes moved from his face to the door behind him, to the snow piling against the threshold, then back to him. She set down the root she'd been holding and wiped her hands on a cloth. "Close the door," she said. Her voice was quiet, but it wasn't weak. It was the kind of voice that didn't waste words. Caleb did as she said, shoving the door shut against the wind. The noise of the storm muffled immediately, reduced to a dull roar outside the walls. The warmth of the room sank into his skin, and for the first time in hours, he could feel his fingers again. "Thank you," he said. She nodded once, then returned to her work as if he wasn't there. Caleb stood awkwardly near the door, unsure what to do with himself. He wasn't used to being in small spaces with strangers, wasn't used to being around people at all, not anymore. But something about the way she moved, steady, deliberate, unbothered by his presence, put him at ease in a way he hadn't expected. He glanced around the shop, taking in the rows of jars, the bundles of plants, the mortar and pestle on the counter. Everything was organized, precise. There was no clutter, no chaos, just order. "You're the herbalist," he said. She didn't look up. "Yes." "People talk about you." "I know." Her tone didn't change, didn't carry bitterness or defensiveness. She stated it the way someone might state the weather, a fact, nothing more. Caleb shifted his weight, suddenly uncomfortable. "I didn't mean, you're bleeding." He blinked. "What?" She set down the root again and looked at him fully for the first time. Her gaze dropped to his hand, the one he'd braced against the door frame when he came in. He followed her eyes and saw the cut across his knuckles, a thin line of red he hadn't noticed until now. "It's nothing," he said. "It will be infected if you don't clean it." She moved around the counter before he could argue, pulling a small tin from one of the shelves and a strip of clean cloth from a drawer. She gestured toward the chair near the stove. "Sit." Caleb hesitated. He wasn't used to being told what to do, especially not by someone he'd just met. But there was something in her voice, not command exactly, but certainty, that made him obey. He sat. She pulled a stool closer and sat across from him, setting the tin and cloth on the small table between them. She reached for his hand without asking, her fingers cool and steady as they turned his palm upward. The cut wasn't deep, but it had bled enough to stain the edge of his glove. "This will sting," she said. She opened the tin, and the sharp smell of alcohol and something herbal filled the air. She dipped the cloth into the mixture and pressed it against the wound. Caleb hissed through his teeth. "Warned you," she said. He almost smiled. Almost. She worked in silence, cleaning the cut with careful precision, her touch light but firm. Caleb watched her hands, the way they moved without hesitation, without waste. He'd spent the last year surrounded by emptiness, by silence, and grief, and the slow decay of everything he'd built with Sarah. But here, in this tiny shop with a woman he didn't know, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Present. "You're good at this," he said quietly. "I should be." She didn't look up. "I've been doing it for 10 years. 10 years? He frowned. "You don't look old enough. I started young." She wrapped the cloth around his knuckles, tying it off with a small knot. When she finished, she sat back and met his eyes. "Keep it clean. Change the bandage tomorrow." "I will." She stood and returned to the counter, washing her hands in a basin near the window. Caleb stayed where he was, flexing his fingers inside the bandage. The sting had already faded, replaced by a dull warmth. "What do I owe you?" he asked. "Nothing. I can pay." "I said nothing." Her tone was final. Caleb didn't push. The storm raged on outside, shaking the walls, rattling the window glass. He glanced toward the door, then back at her. She'd returned to sorting herbs, her movements as steady as before, as if he'd never interrupted. "You're staying here tonight?" he asked. "I live upstairs." "Alone?" She paused just for a second, then continued working. "Yes." Caleb didn't know why he'd asked. It wasn't his business, but something about the thought of her here, alone in this small building while the storm tried to tear the town apart, bothered him. "You should bar the door," he said, "in case the wind gets worse." "I will." Another silence. Caleb rubbed the back of his neck, feeling awkward again. He should leave. The storm was still brutal, but his horse was outside and he couldn't stay here forever. But he didn't move. "What's your name?" he asked. She looked at him, her expression unreadable. For a moment he thought she wouldn't answer. "Lin Yue," she said finally. "Caleb Turner." She nodded as if she'd already known. "The rancher," she said. "You've heard of me?" "People talk." He almost smiled again. "Guess we have that in common." She didn't respond, but something in her eyes softened, just slightly. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Caleb stood, pulling his coat tighter around his shoulders. I should go. The storm hasn't stopped. I know, but I can't stay. Lin Yu studied him for a moment, then turned back to her herbs. Then be careful. He moved toward the door, then hesitated. Thank you. For the hand. Keep it clean, she said again. Caleb pushed the door open, and the wind slammed into him like a living thing. He stepped out into the snow, untying his horse and hauling himself into the saddle. The cold bit through his coat immediately, but he didn't feel it the way he had before. He glanced back at the shop one last time. Through the frosted window, he could see Lin Yu's silhouette, still standing at the counter, still working, still alone. He turned his horse toward the edge of town and rode into the storm. 3 days later, Caleb found himself standing outside her shop again. He told himself it was practical. His hand was healing well, but the bandage needed changing, and he didn't have the supplies to do it right. That was all. Nothing more. But when he pushed the door open and saw her behind the counter, the same steady calm in her eyes, he knew he was lying to himself. You came back, she said. Needed a new bandage. She didn't question him, just gestured toward the chair by the stove. He sat. This time, she didn't say the salve would sting. This time, she didn't have to. They moved through the process in silence, her hands unwrapping the old cloth, cleaning the wound, wrapping it again. It was efficient, routine. But when she finished, she didn't stand right away. How's your ranch? She asked. Caleb blinked, surprised. It's managing. Alone? The word landed heavier than it should have. Yeah, he said. Alone. Lin Yuan nodded slowly, her gaze steady on his. That's hard. He didn't know what to say to that, so he just nodded. She stood then, returning to her work, and Caleb left a few coins on the table, even though he knew she wouldn't take them. When he stepped outside, the air was crisp and clear, the storm long gone. But the warmth from her shop stayed with him all the way home. He came back the next week, and the week after that. Each time he brought a reason. A cough that wouldn't quit, a sore wrist from mending fence posts, trouble sleeping. She treated him without comment, her hands sure and steady, her voice soft but firm. And each time they talked a little more. At first it was nothing, comments about the weather, the state of the town, the goods she'd ordered from the rail depot. Safe topics, neutral ground. But slowly, carefully, the conversations deepened. She told him about her late husband, a man 20 years her senior who'd brought her to Ridgefield and died 6 months later, leaving her with nothing but the shop and a town that didn't trust her. She spoke about it without self-pity, just fact. The way she spoke about everything. Caleb told her about Sarah, about the fever that took her so fast he didn't have time to say goodbye, about the ranch that felt too big now, too quiet, like a house built for ghosts. Lin Yu listened. She didn't offer empty comfort or pointless platitudes. She just listened. And that, Caleb realized, was what he needed most. One evening, as the light outside began to fade, he found himself asking a question he hadn't planned to ask. Do you ever get lonely? She paused, her hand stilling over the bundle of sage she'd been tying. For a long moment, she didn't answer. Then quietly, every day, Caleb swallowed. Me too. Their eyes met across the counter, and something passed between them. Something fragile and unspoken. Something neither of them knew how to name. But it was there. By the time winter began to loosen its grip, Caleb had stopped pretending. He didn't come to the shop for medicine. He came because being near her made the silence bearable. Because her voice, calm and steady, felt like the only thing anchoring him to the world. And though she never said it, he thought maybe she felt the same. One afternoon, as he prepared to leave, she spoke without looking at him. You don't have to keep inventing reasons to come here. Caleb froze, his hand on the door. What? You're not sick, she said. Your hand healed weeks ago. He turned slowly. She was still at the counter, her back to him, but her shoulders were tense. Then why do you let me stay? He asked. She didn't answer right away. When she finally turned to face him, her expression was guarded, but her eyes were clear. Because I'm tired of being alone, she said simply. Caleb's chest tightened. He crossed the room in 3 strides and stopped just short of the counter, close enough to see the faint lines at the corners of her eyes, the way her fingers gripped the edge of the wood. "So am I," he said. Lin Yue held his gaze, and for the first time since he'd met her, he saw something break through that careful calm. Hope. "Then stop pretending," she whispered. Caleb reached across the counter and took her hand. Her fingers were small in his, but they didn't tremble. "I will," he said. "If you will." She nodded, and for the first time in over a year, Caleb Turner felt like he could breathe. The change happened slowly, like snow melting under spring sun. Caleb still came to the shop, but now he didn't bother with excuses. He'd arrive in the late afternoon when the light turned gold through the window, sometimes with nothing more than a nod as greeting. Lin Yue would look up from whatever she was working on, grinding herbs, sorting roots, mixing salves, and something in her expression would soften. Not a smile, exactly. She wasn't given to smiling easily, but a loosening, a quiet acknowledgement that she'd been waiting. He'd pull up the stool near the counter and watch her work. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes they didn't. It didn't seem to matter. What mattered was the company, the shared silence that felt less like loneliness and more like peace. One evening in early March, Caleb arrived to find the shop empty. The door was unlocked, the lamps lit, but Lin Yue wasn't at her usual place behind the counter. He stood in the doorway, uncertain, until he heard movement from upstairs. Footsteps, the creak of floorboards. "Lin Yue?" he called. A pause, then her voice muffled through the ceiling. "Up here." Caleb hesitated. He'd never been upstairs, never been invited. The shop was one thing, neutral territory, a place of business, but her living quarters felt different, private. Still, she'd answered. That had to mean something. He climbed the narrow staircase at the back of the shop, his boots heavy on the old wood. The space above was smaller than he'd imagined. One room, maybe 12 feet square, with a narrow bed against the far wall, a small stove in the corner, and a table barely large enough for two. But it was tidy, orderly, the same careful precision he'd seen in everything she did. Lin Yue stood near the window, holding a bundle of dried flowers he didn't recognize. She glanced at him as he reached the top of the stairs. "I didn't mean to interrupt," Caleb said. "You didn't." She turned back to the flowers, examining them in the fading light. "I was just finishing." He stayed near the stairs, unsure whether to come closer. The room felt intimate in a way that made him acutely aware of his own size, the space he took up. Out on the ranch, he could move without thinking. Here, he felt like he might break something just by breathing wrong. "What are those?" he asked, nodding toward the flowers. "Chrysanthemums. They're for honoring the dead." Her voice was quiet, matter of fact, but there was something beneath it, a weight. "Your husband?" Caleb asked. She nodded. "He died 2 years ago this week." Caleb didn't know what to say to that. Condolences felt hollow, useless. He'd heard enough of them after Sarah died to know they meant nothing. So instead he said, "Do you miss him?" Lin Yue looked at him then, and her expression was complicated. Not grief exactly, but something more layered, more honest. "I miss not being alone," she said finally. "But I don't miss him. Not the way I should." Caleb stepped closer, drawn by the rawness in her voice. "Why not?" She set the flowers down on the table and turned to face him fully. "He was kind to me. He gave me a life here when I had nothing. But he was also old and tired, and he married me because he needed someone to care for him. I did that. I was a good wife. But I was never—" She paused, searching for the word. "I was never his equal. I was his duty. And he was mine." The honesty of it struck Caleb like a fist to the chest. He understood that kind of loneliness, the kind that existed even when you weren't alone. He'd felt it with Sarah toward the end, when the fever hollowed her out and left only fear and pain, when all he could do was watch her slip away, helpless and useless. "Sarah used to say I was too quiet," he said, surprising himself, "that I kept too much inside. She'd get frustrated with me, especially toward the end. She wanted me to talk, to tell her it would be okay, but I couldn't, because I knew it wouldn't be." Lin Yu's gaze didn't waver. "Did she blame you for that?" "I don't know, maybe." He rubbed the back of his neck, the familiar ache of guilt settling in. "I blame myself. For being honest? For not being enough. Lin Yu crossed the small room and stopped in front of him, close enough that he could see the fine lines at the corners of her eyes, the faint scar on her left temple. She looked up at him with those dark, steady eyes, and when she spoke, her voice was firm. "You were enough." She was dying. "Nothing you said would have changed that." Caleb's throat tightened. "How do you know?" "Because I watched my husband die too, and I said all the right things, did everything I was supposed to, and it didn't matter. He still died. And I still felt like I'd failed." She paused. "But I didn't fail. And neither did you. We just loved people we couldn't save." The words hung between them, stark and true. Caleb wanted to look away, to retreat into the safety of silence, but he couldn't. Because she was still looking at him, and for the first time in 2 years, someone was seeing him, really seeing him, and not turning away. "I don't know how to stop feeling like I should have done more," he said quietly. "You don't stop," Lin Yue said. "You just learn to carry it differently." Caleb reached out before he could think better of it, his hand finding hers. Her fingers were cool and small, but they didn't pull away. They held steady. "Is that what you're doing?" he asked. "Learning to carry it?" "I'm trying." He squeezed her hand gently. "So am I." They stood like that for a long moment, the room silent except for the faint crackle of the stove and the distant sounds of the town settling into evening. Then Lin Yu stepped back, releasing his hand, and moved toward the small table. "I was going to make tea," she said. "Stay, if you want." Caleb didn't hesitate. "I want." She prepared the tea with the same careful precision she brought to everything, heating water in a small kettle, measuring leaves into 2 plain ceramic cups. The fragrance that rose from the cups was floral and faintly bitter, unfamiliar but not unpleasant. She handed him one and sat down at the table, gesturing for him to take the other chair. He sat, cradling the cup in his hands, letting the warmth seep into his skin. "What is this?" he asked. "Jasmine. My mother used to make it." "Your mother?" He studied her over the rim of the cup. "You don't talk about her much." "There's not much to say. She died when I was young. I barely remember her." "But you remember the tea?" Lin Yue smiled, a small, fleeting thing, but real. "Yes, I remember the tea." They drank in comfortable silence, the kind of quiet that didn't need filling. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the shutters, and Caleb found himself thinking about how different this felt from the silence at the ranch. There, the quiet was oppressive, heavy with absence. Here, it was something else. Something almost like belonging. "Can I ask you something?" Lin Yue said after a while. "Anything. Why do you keep coming here?" Caleb set down his cup, considering. He could lie, could offer some polite deflection. But they'd moved past that, hadn't they? "Because when I'm here, I don't feel like I'm disappearing," he said. "And I've been disappearing for a long time." Lin Yu's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes deepened. "I know that feeling. Do you feel it now?" he asked. "When I'm here?" She hesitated, then shook her head slowly. "No. When you're here, I feel visible." The words settled between them, fragile and potent. Caleb leaned forward, his forearms resting on the table. "Then I'll keep coming," he said, "if you'll keep letting me." "I will." It wasn't a promise exactly, but it felt like one. But after that night, something shifted. The boundaries that had kept them careful, cautious, began to blur. Caleb started arriving earlier, staying later. Sometimes he brought things, firewood he'd chopped, supplies she'd mentioned needing. Once he brought a sack of potatoes from his root cellar because she'd mentioned the general store was out. "You didn't have to do that," she said, "but she took them anyway." "I know," he said. "I wanted to." Lin Yu, in turn, began to let him see more. She showed him how she prepared certain remedies, explaining the properties of different herbs, the balance required to make something healing instead of harmful. She told him stories about the people who came to her shop, the miner's wife with constant headaches, the shopkeeper's daughter who couldn't sleep, the old man with arthritis in his hands. "They come to you because you help them," Caleb said one evening, watching her grind willow bark into powder. "They come to me because they have no choice," Lin Yue corrected. "The doctor charges too much. I'm cheaper, that's all." "That's not all. You care about them." She paused, the pestle still in her hand. Maybe, but they don't care about me. Caleb frowned. What do you mean? Lin Yue set down the pestle and met his eyes. I hear the things they say, Caleb. When they think I don't understand English well enough, when they're in the store across the street or standing outside the church, they call me the Chinaman's widow. They say I'm strange, foreign, that I practice... She hesitated. That I practice dark things. Anger flared in Caleb's chest, hot and sudden. That's ridiculous. Is it? She gestured around the shop. Look at this place. The herbs, the remedies, the language on my signs. To them, it's all proof that I don't belong. You belong as much as anyone. Do I? Her voice was calm, but there was a challenge in it. You've lived here your whole life, Caleb. You know how this town works? People like me don't belong. We're tolerated. That's different. He wanted to argue, to tell her she was wrong, but he couldn't, because she wasn't. Ridgefield was a small town, and small towns had long memories and short tolerance for anything that didn't fit. He'd seen it before. The traveling preacher who'd been run out for being too loud, the Irish family who'd been cold-shouldered until they left for Montana. The town didn't have to be cruel to make people disappear. It just had to be indifferent. And Lin Yue, with her foreign name and her quiet ways and her shop full of strange remedies, was as foreign as they came. Then they're fools, Caleb said finally, and I don't care what they think. You should, Lin Yue said softly, because if they see you coming here, if they start to talk, it won't just be me they turn on. Caleb stood, closing the distance between them. He didn't touch her, but he was close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. Let them talk, he said. I'm not afraid of them. Maybe you should be. Why? What are they going to do? Stop buying my cattle? I sell to buyers in Cheyenne. Refuse to do business with me? I don't need their business. The only thing this town has ever given me is loneliness, and I'm done with it. Lin Yue stared at him, something unreadable flickering across her face. You say that now, but when it costs you, it won't cost me anything I care about. You don't know that. I do. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and rested his hand against her cheek. Her skin was warm beneath his palm, and when she didn't move, didn't flinch, something in his chest loosened. Because the only thing I care about right now is you. Her breath hitched, barely audible, but he felt it. Caleb, I mean it, he said. I don't care what this town thinks. I care about you. And if that makes me a fool, then I'm a fool. For a long moment, Lin Yue just looked at him, her eyes searching his face as if trying to find the lie, the hesitation. But there wasn't one. Finally, she lifted her hand and placed it over his, holding it against her cheek. You're not a fool, she whispered. But you're going to regret this. No, Caleb said. I won't. And then, because he couldn't help it, because he'd been wanting to for weeks, he leaned down and kissed her. It was gentle at first, tentative, as if they were both testing the solidity of something fragile. But when she didn't pull away, when her hand tightened over his and her lips softened beneath his own, the kiss deepened. It wasn't desperate or frantic. It was slow, deliberate, like everything else between them. A choice made carefully, but made nonetheless. When they finally pulled apart, Lin Yu's eyes were bright, her breathing unsteady. What are we doing? She asked. Caleb rested his forehead against hers, his thumb brushing along her jaw. I don't know, but I don't want to stop. Neither do I, she admitted. But I'm afraid. Of what? Of losing this. Of losing you. Of... She stopped, her voice catching. Of hoping for something that can't last. Caleb pulled back just enough to meet her eyes. Then we won't hope. We'll just be. Right here. Right now. No promises, no expectations, just us. Lin Yu searched his face, and slowly she nodded. Just us. Just us, he echoed. And for that moment, in that small room above the shop, it was enough. The weeks that followed felt like stolen time. Caleb came to the shop every evening, and every evening Lin Yu would finish her work and lead him upstairs. They'd sit at the small table and drink tea, or stand by the stove and talk, or sometimes just exist in the same space without needing to fill it with words. And sometimes when the light was low and the world outside felt far away, Caleb would pull her close and kiss her the way he had that first time, slow and sure, like a promise he didn't know how to speak aloud. Lin Yue didn't resist. She leaned into him, her hands resting against his chest, her breath warm against his skin. She was cautious, careful, but she was also present in a way that made Caleb's heart ache. Because he could feel her wanting this as much as he did, and he could feel her fear too. The fear that it wouldn't last, that something would come between them and tear it all apart. But for now, they had this. And Caleb held on to it like a man holding on to the last bit of light before dark. One night, as they lay side by side on her narrow bed, her head resting on his chest, she asked him a question that cut straight through the quiet. What happens when they find out? Caleb's hand stilled where it had been tracing slow circles on her shoulder. Find out what? About us. He didn't answer right away, because he didn't have a good answer. The truth was, he didn't know what would happen. Ridgefield wasn't a violent town, but it was a proud one, and pride could be just as dangerous as violence when it felt threatened. They'll talk, he said finally. But they've been talking about both of us for years. This won't change that. It will, Lin Yue said quietly, because now they'll have proof that I'm taking something that isn't mine. Caleb frowned. What are you talking about? She lifted her head to look at him, her expression sad but resolute. You. A white rancher, a man with land and a name and a place in this town. They'll say I seduced you, that I used my remedies to trap you, that I'm trying to take what belongs to them. You're not taking anything. I'm choosing this. I'm choosing you. I know that, but they won't see it that way. Caleb sat up, pulling her with him so they were facing each other. He took her hands in his, holding them tightly. Then let them think whatever they want, he said. I don't care. You will when they make your life hell. Lin Yue. He waited until she met his eyes. I've been living in hell for 2 years. You're the only thing that's pulled me out of it. If they want to come at me for that, let them. I'm not giving you up. Her eyes shimmered, and for a moment he thought she might cry. But she didn't. She just held his gaze, her jaw tight, and nodded. All right, she whispered. All right. Caleb pulled her into his arms, holding her close, and tried not to think about what was coming, because something was coming. He could feel it in the way the town had started to shift, the looks that lingered a little too long when he walked down the street, the conversations that stopped when he entered the general store. They knew, or they suspected, and it was only a matter of time before suspicion turned into something worse. But for now, in this moment, with Lin Yue warm and solid in his arms, he refused to let fear win. I'm not letting go, he said into her hair. No matter what happens, I'm not letting go. Lin Yu's arms tightened around him, and he felt her nod against his chest. Neither am I, she whispered, and Caleb believed her. The confrontation came on a Tuesday afternoon in late April, when the mud from the spring thaw was still thick in the streets, and the air carried the sharp smell of wet earth and manure. Caleb had just left the feed store with an order of grain when he saw them, 3 men standing near the hitching post where he'd tied his horse. He recognized them immediately. Marcus Webb, who owned the saloon and half the buildings on Main Street. Tom Garrett, the town's self-appointed moral authority and head of the church council. And Sheriff Dale Hutchins, a man Caleb had known since childhood, back when they'd hunted rabbits together in the hills outside town. None of them looked friendly. Caleb kept walking, his jaw tight, and began loading the grain into his saddlebags. He could feel their eyes on him, could sense the conversation they were having without words. Finally, Marcus cleared his throat. Caleb, got a minute? Caleb didn't look up. Not particularly. This won't take long. There was an edge to Marcus's voice that made Caleb pause. He straightened slowly, turning to face them. Marcus stood with his arms crossed, his expression hard. Tom looked sanctimonious, his thin mouth pressed into a disapproving line. And Dale? Dale just looked uncomfortable, his hand resting on his belt like he wished he were anywhere else. What do you want? Caleb asked. Marcus exchanged a glance with Tom, then stepped forward. We want to talk to you about the widow. Caleb's stomach tightened, but he kept his voice level. Her name is Lin Yue. We know her name, Tom said sharply. And we know you've been spending a considerable amount of time at her establishment. Her shop, Caleb corrected. It's a shop, and what I do with my time is my business. Not when it affects the town, Marcus said. People are talking, Caleb, and they're concerned. Concerned about what? Tom stepped forward, his face flushed. About your association with that woman, about what it looks like, about what it means. Caleb felt heat rising in his chest, anger he'd been holding back for weeks finally breaking through. What it looks like? You mean the fact that I've been visiting someone who helps people? Someone who's done more good in this town than half the folks standing in that church on Sunday. She's not one of us, Tom said flatly. She's foreign. She practices medicine, Caleb interrupted. She practices medicine, and she's better at it than Doc Morrison ever was. That's not the point, Marcus said, his voice measured but firm. The point is perception, Caleb. You're a respected man in this town. You've got land, you've got history here, people look up to you. And when they see you spending all your time with someone like her, Caleb repeated, his voice low and dangerous. Say what you mean, Marcus. Marcus hesitated, then shrugged. Fine. She's Chinese. She's a widow with no family, no connections, no standing. And you're a white rancher who lost his wife and is clearly not thinking straight. People are starting to wonder if she's taken advantage of your grief. If she's using her remedies to... Caleb took a step forward, and Marcus stopped talking. Dale's hand moved toward his gun, but Caleb ignored him. Let me make something very clear, Caleb said quietly. Lin Yue hasn't taken advantage of anyone. She's the most honest person I've ever met. And if you're implying that I'm too weak or too stupid to make my own decisions, then you can go to hell. Tom's face turned purple. How dare you? I dare because it's the truth. Caleb turned to face all three of them. You don't care about me. You don't care about what's good for me or what makes me happy. You care about control. You care about keeping everything in this town exactly the way it's always been, even if it means making people miserable. This isn't about control, Marcus said. This is about order, about propriety, about fear, Caleb cut in. You're afraid of her because she's different, because she doesn't need your approval to survive. And you're afraid of me because I'm choosing her over you. Dale finally spoke, his voice quiet. Caleb, we're just trying to help. You've been through a lot. Losing Sarah, it changed you. Maybe you're not seeing things clearly. Caleb looked at his old friend, and something in him broke. Because Dale wasn't being cruel. He actually believed what he was saying. He actually thought he was helping. You're right, Caleb said. Losing Sarah changed me. It broke me. And for 2 years, I've been trying to put myself back together while everyone in this town pretended not to notice. But Lin Yu noticed. She didn't pity me or avoid me or treat me like I was fragile. She just saw me. And that's worth more than anything you're offering. What we're offering, Tom said icily, is a chance to walk away from this foolishness before it destroys what's left of your reputation. My reputation? Caleb laughed, a harsh sound. What reputation? I'm a widower who barely speaks, who lives alone on a failing ranch. You think I care what people say about me? You should, Marcus said, because if you keep this up, you won't just be a widower. You'll be an outcast, and so will she. The threat hung in the air, heavy and unmistakable. Caleb felt his hands curl into fists at his sides. Are you threatening her? We're stating facts, Tom said. The town has been tolerant of Mrs. Chen's presence because she's quiet and keeps to herself. But if she's seen as disrupting the social order, if she's seen as corrupting one of our own, corrupting, Caleb's voice rose. She's not corrupting anyone. She's a healer. She's a good woman. And if you go after her because of me, I swear to you, you'll what? Marcus challenged. Fight the whole town. You can't win that fight, Caleb, and neither can she. Caleb stared at him, his chest heaving, his mind racing, because Marcus was right. If the town turned on Lin Yue, really turned on her, there was nothing he could do to protect her. They couldn't run her out legally, but they could make her life impossible. They could stop buying from her shop, could spread rumors, could pressure her until she had no choice but to leave, and it would all be because of him. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. He'd told Lin Yue he didn't care what the town thought, that he wasn't afraid of them, but he hadn't thought about what they could do to her, hadn't thought about the cost she'd pay for his defiance. Dale must have seen something in his face because his expression softened. Just think about it, Caleb. That's all we're asking. Think about what's best for everyone. Caleb didn't answer. He turned back to his horse, finished loading the grain, and swung into the saddle. He could feel their eyes on him as he rode away, could feel the weight of their judgment pressing down on his shoulders. But he didn't look back. Tia. He went straight to Lin Yu's shop. She was behind the counter when he walked in, her hands busy with a bundle of dried lavender. She looked up, smiling, but the smile faded when she saw his face. "What happened?" she asked. Caleb closed the door behind him and crossed to the counter in 3 long strides. He told her everything: the confrontation, the threats, the thinly veiled warnings. Lin Yu listened in silence, her expression growing more guarded with every word. When he finished, she set down the lavender and folded her hands on the counter. "I told you this would happen," she said quietly. "I know. And it's only going to get worse." "I know." "Then what do we do?" Caleb reached across the counter and took her hands in his. They were trembling slightly, but her gaze was steady. "We don't give them what they want," he said. "We don't hide. We don't pretend. We stand together and we let them see that we're not ashamed." Lin Yu shook her head. "Caleb, you don't understand. If they turn on me, they won't." "How can you be sure?" "Because I won't let them." He squeezed her hands. "Lin Yu, I meant what I said. I'm not letting go. Not now. Not ever. Even if it costs you everything." "You are everything," he said simply. "The ranch, the town, my reputation, none of it matters if I lose you." Her eyes filled with tears, and she pulled one hand free to press it against his cheek. "You're going to regret this." "No," Caleb said. "I won't. The only thing I'd regret is walking away." Lin Yu stared at him for a long moment, and then she did something he'd never seen her do. She smiled, a real smile, wide and unguarded and beautiful. "Then we fight," she said. "Together," Caleb added. "Together." The next 2 weeks were tense, charged with an undercurrent of hostility that seemed to permeate every corner of Ridgefield. Caleb felt it every time he walked into town. The way conversation stopped when he passed, the way people looked at him and then quickly looked away. He ignored it, kept his head down, and went about his business. But he also made sure everyone saw him going to Lin Yu's shop. He didn't sneak in through the back or wait until dark. He walked through the front door in broad daylight, and he stayed as long as he wanted. Lin Yu, for her part, didn't change. She continued her work with the same quiet competence, treating anyone who came through her door, regardless of what they might have said about her behind her back. If she felt the weight of the town's judgment, she didn't show it. But Caleb saw the signs. The way her shoulders tensed when the bell above the door rang. The way she glanced toward the window whenever footsteps passed outside. The way she held herself a little stiffer, a little more carefully, as if she were bracing for impact. It broke his heart. One evening, as they sat together upstairs, Caleb asked her something he'd been afraid to ask. "Do you wish I'd stayed away?" Lin Yu looked at him, surprised. "No. Why would I?" "Because if I had, none of this would be happening. You'd still be safe." "I was never safe, Caleb. I was tolerated. There's a difference." She reached for his hand. "And even if I could go back, even if I could undo everything, I wouldn't. Because you're the first person in 2 years who's made me feel like I matter. Like I'm more than just the strange widow who sells herbs." Caleb pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her. "You matter," he said fiercely. "You matter to me." She rested her head against his chest, and they stayed like that until the light outside faded to black. The breaking point came in mid-May, on the night of the town's annual spring social. Caleb hadn't planned to go. He'd avoided town gatherings for 2 years, ever since Sarah's funeral. But when he mentioned it to Lin Yu, she'd looked at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "You should go," she said. "I don't want to." "Why not?" "Because you won't be there." Lin Yu gave him a sad smile. "I'm never invited to those things, Caleb. You know that." "Then I'm not going." "Yes, you are." She touched his face gently. "You can't hide from them forever. And you shouldn't have to." "I'm not hiding. I just don't care about their parties." "Maybe not, but they care. And if you don't show up, They'll say it's because of me, that I've isolated you, made you a recluse. She paused. Go. Show them you're still you, that I haven't changed you into something you're not. Caleb wanted to argue, but he could see the logic in what she was saying, and he could see the fear beneath it, the fear that if he disappeared completely from town life, it would give them more ammunition to use against her. Fine, he said. I'll go, but I'm not staying long. That's all I'm asking. So, the social was held in the town hall, a large wooden building at the center of Main Street. By the time Caleb arrived, it was already crowded, filled with the smell of roasted meat and fresh bread and the sound of fiddle music echoing off the rafters. People milled about in groups, laughing and talking, their faces flushed with warmth and whiskey. Caleb stood near the door, feeling immediately out of place. He recognized most of the faces, neighbors, shopkeepers, ranchers from the surrounding area, but he didn't belong here. Not anymore. Maybe not ever. He was about to leave when Dale spotted him and waved him over. Caleb, didn't think you'd come. Neither did I, Caleb muttered. Dale grinned and clapped him on the shoulder. Well, I'm glad you did. Come on, I'll get you a drink. Caleb let himself be led to the bar, where Dale poured him a glass of whiskey. They stood in awkward silence for a moment, and then Dale cleared his throat. Look, about the other day, I didn't mean to come down on you so hard. I was just worried. I know, Caleb said, but you don't need to be. Maybe not, but people are still talking. Let them. Dale studied him for a long moment, then sighed. You really care about her, don't you? Caleb met his eyes. Yes. Enough to lose everything? I'm not losing anything that matters. Dale shook his head, but there was something almost like respect in his expression. You're a stubborn bastard, Caleb Turner. So I've been told. They drank in silence after that, and for a moment Caleb thought maybe the night wouldn't be so bad. Maybe he could get through this, go home, and tell Lin Yue that everything had been fine. But then Marcus Webb appeared. He wasn't alone. Tom Garrett was with him, along with two other men Caleb didn't know well, businessmen from town, judging by their clothes. They moved through the crowd with purpose, and when they reached Caleb, Marcus planted himself directly in front of him. Turner, he said, we need to talk. I'm done talking, Caleb said flatly. Well, I'm not. Marcus gestured to the men beside him. We've been discussing your situation, and we've come to a decision. Caleb set down his glass, his jaw tightening. What decision? Tom stepped forward, his voice loud enough to carry. The decision that your relationship with the widow Chen is inappropriate and detrimental to the moral fabric of this community. The music stopped. Conversations died. Every eye in the room turned toward them. Caleb felt his pulse quicken, but he kept his voice steady. You don't get to make that decision. We do, actually, Marcus said. As representatives of this town's business and moral leadership, we have a responsibility to address behavior that threatens our values. Threatens your values, Caleb repeated. By spending time with a woman who's done nothing wrong. She's foreign, Tom said bluntly. She practices heathen remedies, and she's clearly exerting an unnatural influence over you. Caleb laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. Unnatural influence? Is that what you call it when someone treats you with kindness and respect? We call it what it is, Tom said. Corruption. And we're here to tell you it ends now. The room was silent. Caleb could feel the weight of every gaze, could sense the tension coiling tighter with every word. He knew he should walk away, should leave before this got worse. But he didn't, because if he walked away now, if he let them talk about Lin Yu like she was something dirty and shameful, he'd never forgive himself. No, Caleb said quietly. Marcus frowned. What? I said no. Caleb's voice rose, filling the room. You want to talk about corruption? Let's talk about how you've treated her since the day she arrived. How you've whispered about her, avoided her, acted like she's less than human because she wasn't born here. She's lived in this town for 2 years, and not one of you has ever tried to know her. You've just judged her. She's not, Tom began, but Caleb cut him off. She's a healer. She's helped half the people in this room at some point, whether you want to admit it or not, and she's a better person than any of you. He looked around the room, meeting every eye that would hold his. I love her, and I'm not ashamed of it. The silence that followed was absolute. Marcus recovered first, his face flushed with anger. Then you're a fool. Maybe, Caleb said. But I'd rather be a fool who loves someone than a coward who hides behind judgment. He turned and walked out of the hall, his heart pounding, his hands shaking. Behind him, the whispers started immediately, rising like a wave. But he didn't care. Because for the first time in his life, Caleb Turner had told the truth in front of the whole town, and it felt like freedom. He went straight to Lin Yu. The streets were dark, lit only by scattered lamplight from windows and the pale glow of a half moon. Caleb's boots struck hard against the wooden boards as he walked, his breath coming fast, adrenaline still coursing through his veins. He'd just burned every bridge he had in Ridgefield, and he didn't regret a single word. The shop was dark when he arrived, but he could see light coming from the window upstairs. He knocked on the door, hard enough to rattle the frame. Lin Yue, it's me. A moment later, the door opened. She stood there in a simple cotton nightgown, her hair loose around her shoulders, her eyes wide with alarm. Caleb? What happened? He stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, closing the door behind him. His hands were still shaking, his heart still racing, and when he looked at her, standing there in the dim light, her face full of concern, something inside him broke open. I told them, he said. Lin Yue went very still. Told them what? Everything, that I love you, that I don't care what they think, that they can judge me all they want, but I'm not giving you up. Her hand flew to her mouth. Caleb, you didn't... I did. At the social. In front of the whole town. He ran a hand through his hair, feeling wild and reckless and more alive than he'd felt in years. Marcus and Tom cornered me. They said our relationship was inappropriate, that you were corrupting me, that it had to end, and I told them no. I told them I love you, and I'm not ashamed. Lin Yue stared at him, her face pale. Do you understand what you've done? Yes. They'll destroy you for this. They'll make sure you have nothing left. I don't care. Caleb, I don't care, he repeated, closing the distance between them. He cupped her face in his hands, forcing her to meet his eyes. I don't care about the ranch. I don't care about my reputation. I don't care about any of it. The only thing I care about is you, and if loving you means losing everything else, then I'll lose it gladly. Tears spilled down her cheeks and she shook her head. You shouldn't have to choose. But I do. And I'm choosing you. Every time, Lin Yue. I'm choosing you. She let out a sob and threw her arms around his neck, burying her face against his chest. Caleb held her tight, his own eyes burning, his throat thick with emotion. I'm scared, she whispered. So am I. What if they come after us? What if they force me to leave? Then we'll leave together. She pulled back to look at him, her eyes searching his face. You'd do that? You'd leave your home? It's not my home anymore. It hasn't been since Sarah died. It's just a place. He brushed a tear from her cheek with his thumb. But you're the first thing that's felt like home in 2 years, and I'll follow you anywhere. Lin Yu's breath hitched, and then she was kissing him, fierce and desperate, her hands fisting in his shirt. Caleb kissed her back with everything he had, pouring all his fear and defiance and love into the press of his lips against hers. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathing hard. What do we do now? She asked. Caleb's jaw tightened. We wait, and we see what they do next. What they did next came faster than either of them expected. The next morning, Caleb woke to the sound of horses outside his ranch house. He pulled on his clothes and stepped onto the porch to find Marcus Webb, Tom Garrett, and 3 other men he recognized from the town council sitting on horseback at the edge of his property. Marcus dismounted first, his expression grim. We need to talk, Turner. Caleb crossed his arms. So talk. Not here. At the town hall. Official business. I'm not interested in your official business. You don't have a choice, Tom said. The council has called a meeting to address your conduct. You're required to attend. Caleb laughed. Required? By what authority? By the authority of the community you're a part of, Marcus said. Whether you like it or not, your actions affect more than just you, and the council has a responsibility to address them. My actions, Caleb repeated slowly. You mean falling in love with someone you don't approve of? We mean your public declaration of a relationship that violates the moral standards of this town, Tom said stiffly. And your refusal to show proper respect for the concerns of your neighbors. Caleb stared at them, anger simmering beneath his skin. And if I refuse to attend your meeting? Marcus's expression hardened. Then we'll have no choice but to take more direct action, starting with a formal petition to have Mrs. Chen's business license revoked. The words hit Caleb like a physical blow. You can't do that. We can, actually. Her license was granted on the condition that she maintain good standing in the community. If the council determines that she's become a disruptive influence, she hasn't disrupted anything, Caleb said through gritted teeth. The only disruption is coming from you. That's a matter of perspective, Tom said, and the council's perspective is what matters. Caleb felt rage building in his chest, hot and violent. He wanted to drag Tom off his horse and beat him into the dirt, wanted to tell them all to go to hell and never come back. But he couldn't, because if he did, they'd take it out on Lin Yue. Fine, he said finally. I'll attend your meeting. But if you think I'm going to apologize or back down, you're wrong. We'll see, Marcus said. He swung back onto his horse. Tomorrow, 2:00. Don't be late. They rode off, leaving Caleb standing alone on his porch, his hands clenched into fists. He went to Lin Yue immediately and told her everything. She listened in silence, her face growing paler with every word. When he finished, she sat down heavily in one of the chairs by the stove. They're going to take my shop, she said quietly. Not if I can stop them. How? You can't fight the entire council, Caleb. They have the law on their side. The law isn't always right. But it's powerful. She looked up at him, her eyes hollow. And we're not. Caleb knelt in front of her, taking her hands. Lin Yue, listen to me. I'm not going to let them take your shop. I'm not going to let them destroy what you've built. Then what are you going to do? He didn't have an answer, not yet, but he knew he had to find one. Well, the meeting was held in the town hall, the same place where Caleb had made his declaration 2 nights before. This time, the room was arranged differently. A long table at the front where the council members sat, and rows of chairs facing them for the audience. Every seat was filled. It seemed like half the town had shown up to watch. Caleb walked in alone and took a seat in the front row. He could feel eyes on him from every direction, could hear the whispers that followed him like a shadow. He ignored them all. Marcus called the meeting to order, his voice formal and detached. We're here today to address the matter of Caleb Turner and his relationship with Mrs. Lin Yu Chen. Mr. Turner, you're welcome to speak in your own defense. Caleb stood, his jaw tight. I don't need to defend myself. I haven't done anything wrong. That's a matter of opinion, Tom said. And the council's opinion is that your relationship with Mrs. Chen is inappropriate and damaging to the community's moral standards. Based on what? Caleb demanded. The fact that she's Chinese? The fact that she's a widow? Or the fact that you're all too small-minded to accept that someone different from you might actually be a good person? A murmur ran through the crowd. Marcus rapped his knuckles on the table. Mr. Turner, inflammatory language won't help your case. I don't have a case, Caleb shot back, because this isn't a trial. It's a witch hunt. Tom's face flushed red. How dare you? How dare you? Caleb interrupted, his voice rising. You sit up there acting like you're protecting this town, but all you're doing is protecting your own power. You don't care about morality. You care about control, and you can't control Lin Yue, so you want to get rid of her. That's not true, Marcus said, but there was something uncertain in his voice now. Isn't it? Then tell me, what exactly has she done wrong? She runs a business. She helps people. She keeps to herself. The only thing she's guilty of is being different, and the only thing I'm guilty of is seeing past that. You're guilty of defying the social order, Tom said, of consorting with someone beneath your station. Caleb's hands clenched. Beneath my station. She's more educated, more skilled, and more decent than half the people in this room. The only reason you see her as beneath me is because of your own prejudice. This is getting us nowhere, Marcus said. He looked down at a piece of paper in front of him. The council has reviewed Mrs. Chen's business license, and we've determined that... Wait. The voice came from the back of the room. Caleb turned, and his breath caught. Lin Yue stood in the doorway. She was dressed simply, in a dark blue dress with her hair pulled back, but she held herself with quiet dignity. Every eye in the room turned to her as she walked down the center aisle, her footsteps the only sound. "Mrs. Chen," Marcus said, surprise evident in his voice. "This meeting doesn't concern you." "It does if you're discussing my business license," Lin Yu said. Her voice was calm, steady, without a trace of fear. "I have a right to be here." Tom stood. "You have no rights in this matter. You're not a citizen." "I'm a resident. I pay taxes. I contribute to this community." She stopped in front of the council table and looked each member in the eye. "And I deserve to be heard." Marcus hesitated, then gestured to an empty chair. "Very well, speak." Lin Yu didn't sit. She stood, her hands folded in front of her, and addressed the room. "I came to Ridgefield 2 years ago as a widow with nothing. My husband gave me this shop and a chance to survive, and when he died, I chose to stay. I could have left. I could have gone to San Francisco or Denver, places where I wouldn't stand out so much, but I stayed because I believed I could do good here." Her voice was quiet, but it carried. Caleb could see people leaning forward, listening. "Since I opened my shop, I've treated over 200 people. I've helped children with fever, mothers with pain, men with injuries they couldn't afford to have a doctor treat. I've asked for nothing in return except the price of my herbs. I've never turned anyone away, no matter what they said about me behind my back." She paused, and Caleb saw her hands tremble slightly before she steadied them. "I know what you think of me. I know you call me foreign, strange, dangerous. I know you see me as something that doesn't belong. And maybe you're right. Maybe I don't belong in a town that judges people by the color of their skin or the place they were born instead of the content of their character." Tom opened his mouth to speak, but Lin Yu continued, her voice growing stronger. "But Caleb Turner belongs here. He was born here. His family helped build this town. And he's a good man. The kind of man who sees people for who they are, not what they look like. If you punish him for that, if you take away his place in this community because he chose to love someone you don't approve of, then you're not protecting your values. You're destroying them." The room was silent. Lin Yu turned to face Caleb, and her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I don't want him to lose everything because of me. I don't want to be the reason his life falls apart. So if revoking my license will end this, then do it. I'll leave Ridgefield. I'll go somewhere else. But don't punish him for my sake." "No," Caleb said immediately, standing. "No, you're not leaving." "Caleb," I said no. He crossed to her and took her hand, not caring who was watching. "You're not leaving, and they're not taking your shop. Because if they do, I'll burn this whole town down before I let them get away with it." A shocked murmur ran through the crowd. Marcus stood, his face red. "That's enough, Turner. You're out of line." "I'm out of line?" Caleb turned on him, still holding Lin Yu's hand. "You're trying to destroy an innocent woman because she had the audacity to fall in love with me, and I'm out of line?" "She's not innocent," Tom said. "She's—" "What?" Caleb challenged. "Say it. Go ahead. Tell everyone what you really think. Tell them why you want her gone." Tom's mouth worked soundlessly. Around the room, people shifted uncomfortably. Finally, Dale Hutchins stood. He'd been sitting quietly at the side of the room, but now he stepped forward. "I'd like to say something," he said. Marcus frowned. "Sheriff, this isn't— I said I'd like to say something." Dale's voice was firm. He looked at Lin Yu. "Mrs. Chen, you treated my daughter last winter when she had pneumonia. Doc Morrison said there was nothing he could do, that we should prepare for the worst. But you came to my house every day for a week with your remedies. You stayed up nights making sure she could breathe. And when she pulled through, you didn't ask for a penny." Lin Yu's eyes widened slightly, but she said nothing. Dale turned to face the council. "I don't know what you think gives you the right to sit in judgment of this woman, but I can tell you right now, she's done more good for this town than most of us ever will. And if you revoke her license, you're not just hurting her, you're hurting everyone who depends on her." "That's not the point," Tom said weakly. "Then what is the point?" Dale challenged. "That she's Chinese, that she's a widow, that she doesn't fit your idea of what a proper woman should be?" He shook his head. "I'm ashamed to be part of this." Another voice spoke up from the crowd, a woman Caleb recognized as the wife of the general store owner. "Mrs. Chen helped my son when he broke his arm. She set the bone and gave him something for the pain, saved us a fortune in doctor's fees." Another voice. "She gave my mother herbs for her arthritis. First time in years she could work without crying." One by one, people stood and spoke. Stories poured out, children healed, pain eased, lives improved. Not everyone spoke. Some sat in stony silence, their faces hard. But enough people spoke that the tide in the room began to shift. Marcus looked around, his expression uncertain. Tom had gone pale. Finally, Marcus cleared his throat. The council will take this testimony under advisement. We'll reconvene in 1 week to make a final decision on Mrs. Chen's license. No, Caleb said. Marcus blinked. Excuse me? I said no. You don't get a week. You make your decision now, in front of everyone. Mr. Turner, that's not how this works. I don't care how it works. Caleb's voice rang through the hall. You called this meeting to humiliate us, to force us to bend to your will. Well, we're not bending. We're standing right here, in front of this whole town, and we're asking you to make a choice. Do you stand with us? Or do you stand with fear and prejudice? The silence that followed was absolute. Finally, Dale spoke again. I stand with them. The woman who'd spoken about her son stood. So do I. One by one, people rose from their seats. Not everyone. Not even most. But enough. Marcus looked around the room, his face ashen. He exchanged a glance with Tom, who slumped in his chair, defeated. The council, Marcus said slowly, will not be revoking Mrs. Chen's business license at this time. Relief flooded through Caleb so strongly he thought his knees might buckle. Beside him, Lin Yue let out a shaky breath. However, Marcus continued, his voice hard, this matter is not closed. The council reserves the right to revisit this issue should circumstances change. They won't, Caleb said. Marcus didn't respond. He gathered his papers and stood. This meeting is adjourned. The crowd began to disperse, people filing out in small groups, their voices low. Caleb turned to Lin Yue and pulled her into his arms, not caring who saw. It's over, he whispered against her hair. For now, she said, but she was smiling. They walked back to her shop together, hand in hand, through streets that felt different now. Not welcoming, exactly, but not hostile either, just uncertain. When they reached the shop, Lin Yu unlocked the door and turned to face him. What you did today, standing up for me in front of everyone, I'll never forget it. Caleb cupped her face in his hands. I meant every word. I know. She rose on her toes and kissed him softly. And I love you for it. It was the first time she'd said it out loud, the first time she'd let the words cross her lips without hesitation or fear. Caleb's chest tightened. Say it again. I love you, she whispered. I love you, Caleb Turner. He kissed her then, deep and slow, pouring everything he felt into the press of his lips against hers. When they finally pulled apart, he rested his forehead against hers. Marry me, he said. Lin Yue's eyes went wide. What? Marry me, not because I want to protect you or make a statement to the town, but because I want to spend the rest of my life with you. Because I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep beside you every night. Because you're the only thing in this world that makes sense to me. Tears spilled down her cheeks. Caleb, I know it won't be easy. I know the town will talk and some people will never accept us. But I don't care. As long as I have you, nothing else matters. Lin Yu stared at him, her breath coming in short gasps. Then, slowly, she nodded. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I'll marry you. Caleb let out a laugh, half relief, half joy, and swept her into his arms, spinning her around. When he set her down, they were both laughing and crying at the same time. When? She asked. As soon as possible. Where? I don't care. Here. The ranch. The middle of Main Street. Wherever you want. Lin Yue smiled through her tears. How about the shop? This is where it started. Then the shop it is. They kissed again, and this time it felt like a promise. Like the beginning of something neither of them had dared to hope for. A future. Together. They were married 3 weeks later on a Sunday morning in June, when the wildflowers were blooming across the prairie and the sky stretched wide and blue overhead. Lin Yu had wanted something simple, something that reflected who they were rather than what the town expected. So they stood in the small space of her shop, surrounded by the bundles of dried herbs and the shelves of remedies that had brought them together, and spoke vows that needed no preacher to make them true. Dale Hutchins stood as witness, along with his wife Margaret and their daughter Anna, the little girl Lin Yue had saved from pneumonia. A handful of others came too, people who'd spoken up at the council meeting, people who'd been helped by Lin Yue's healing hands and saw past the color of her skin to the goodness beneath. Not many, but enough. Lin Yue wore a dress she'd sewn herself from pale gray silk, simple and elegant, with her dark hair braided and wound with small white flowers. Caleb had never seen anything more beautiful in his life. When he took her hands and looked into her eyes, the rest of the world fell away. "I promise to see you," he said quietly, "every day for the rest of my life, to listen when you speak and hold you when you're silent, to stand with you against whatever comes, to choose you, always." Lin Yu's voice was steady despite the tears on her cheeks. "I promise to trust you, to let you carry what I can't carry alone, to build a life with you that's ours, not theirs, to be your home as you are mine." There was no ring. Neither of them cared about that. But Caleb had brought something else. He pulled a small bundle from his pocket and unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a jade pendant on a simple cord, no bigger than his thumb, carved in the shape of a lotus flower. "It was my mother's," he said. "She died when I was young, but my father kept it all these years. I want you to have it." Lin Yue's hands trembled as she took it, her eyes wide. "Caleb, I can't." "You can. You're my family now, and I want you to have something that mattered." He lifted the cord and fastened it around her neck. The jade rested against her collarbone, warm from his hands. She touched it gently, then reached up and pulled him down into a kiss. It was soft and sweet and full of promise, and when they pulled apart, Dale was grinning. "Well, I'd say that makes it official," he said. "Congratulations, you two." Margaret stepped forward and embraced Lin Yue. "Welcome to the family, dear, such as it is." Anna tugged on Lin Yue's skirt. "Does this mean you're Mrs. Turner now?" Lin Yue smiled down at her. "I suppose it does." "Good. That's easier to say than Chen." Everyone laughed, and the tension that had been hanging over the morning broke like a storm cloud giving way to sun. They shared a simple meal afterward, bread and cheese and dried fruit that Lin Yue had prepared, along with tea she'd brewed from herbs that smelled of honey and summer. People talked quietly, offered congratulations, then slowly drifted away until only Caleb and Lin Yue remained. She stood at the window looking out at the street where afternoon light slanted gold across the dusty boards. Caleb came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "That this is real," she said softly. "That you're real. That somehow, against everything, we made it here. We did." "Are you scared?" Caleb considered the question. "No, not anymore. Whatever comes next, we'll face it together. That's all that matters." Lin Yu turned in his arms and looked up at him. "Then take me home." "The ranch?" She nodded. "I want to see where you grew up, where we'll build our life." Caleb's chest tightened with something warm and fierce. "Then let's go." The ranch was 10 miles outside Ridgefield, nestled in a valley where the wind sang through tall grass and cottonwood trees grew thick along a narrow creek. The house itself was modest, 2 stories, weathered wood, a wide porch that wrapped around the front. Caleb had built most of it himself with his father when he was still young enough to think the work romantic instead of backbreaking. When they arrived, Lin Yue dismounted from the wagon and stood for a long moment, just taking it in. The house. The barn. The fields stretching away toward distant hills. The sky overhead, impossibly vast. "It's beautiful," she said. Caleb climbed down beside her. "It's rough. Needs a lot of work. The roof leaks in 2 places, the fence needs mending, and the garden's gone to seed. But it's ours now, if you want it." Lin Yu turned to him, her expression serious. "I want it. I want all of it. The work, the struggle, the life we'll build here. I want it because it's ours." Caleb took her hand and led her up the porch steps. The door stuck a little when he pushed it open. It always did, but it gave way, revealing the interior he hadn't really looked at in months. Dust covered the furniture. Cobwebs hung in the corners. The air smelled stale and closed off, like a place that had been holding its breath for too long. But Lin Yue didn't flinch. She walked through the front room, trailing her fingers along the back of the old sofa, examining the fireplace, the shelves, the windows that looked out over the fields. Then she turned to face him. "We'll clean it together," she said. "Make it ours." And they did. They spent the next week transforming the house from a shrine to Caleb's grief into something new. They scrubbed floors and washed windows and aired out rooms that hadn't seen light in too long. Lin Yue brought herbs from her shop and hung them in the kitchen, filling the house with the scent of sage and lavender. She rearranged the furniture, brought in simple things: a quilt she'd made, ceramic jars for tea, a small painting of mountains she'd carried from her old home. Caleb mended the roof and fixed the fence and cleared the garden plot. He taught Lin Yue how to ride his horses, laughing when she gripped the reins too tight and nearly fell off the first time. She taught him the names of plants he'd walked past his whole life without seeing: yarrow for wounds, chamomile for sleep, willow bark for pain. They worked side by side from dawn until dusk, and at night they fell into bed exhausted and tangled together, her head on his chest, his hand in her hair. Sometimes they talked, sometimes they didn't, but always they were together. It wasn't perfect. The work was hard, the house still had problems, and the town's judgment hadn't disappeared. When they went into Ridgefield for supplies, people still stared. Some turned away, others whispered. But there were also people who nodded, who offered brief smiles, who treated them like human beings instead of scandals. Slowly, grudgingly, the town began to shift. The real change came in August, when a fever swept through Ridgefield. It started with the children, 3 kids who came down with high temperatures and violent coughing within days of each other. Then it spread. Within a week, half the families in town had at least one person sick. Doc Morrison did what he could, but he was old and overwhelmed, and his remedies weren't working. People were desperate. And desperate people went to Lin Yue. She worked around the clock, preparing tinctures and teas, visiting homes, sitting with the sick while their families slept. Caleb helped however he could, delivering remedies, boiling water, holding children still while Lin Yue administered treatments. They barely slept, barely ate. But slowly, people started to recover. The turning point came when Tom Garrett's grandson fell ill. The boy was 8 years old, and the fever hit him hard. Tom brought him to Doc Morrison first, of course. But when the doctor admitted he didn't know what else to do, when the boy's temperature kept climbing and his breathing turned shallow, Tom swallowed his pride and came to the ranch. Caleb answered the door to find Tom standing on the porch, his hat in his hands, his face haggard. "I need to speak to your wife," Tom said stiffly. Caleb stared at him, remembering every word Tom had said at that council meeting. Every judgment, every condemnation. Part of him wanted to slam the door in the man's face. But Lin Yue appeared behind him, her hand on his arm. "Let him in," she said quietly. Caleb stepped aside. Tom stood awkwardly in the front room, his eyes taking in the changes they'd made. The herbs hanging from the rafters, the order and cleanliness, the sense of life that filled the space. Then he looked at Lin Yue. "My grandson is dying," he said bluntly. "Doc Morrison says there's nothing more he can do. I know what I said about you, I know I was wrong, but I'm begging you, please help him." Lin Yue studied him for a long moment. Caleb could see the war playing out behind her eyes, the hurt Tom had caused, the justice in refusing him. But then she nodded. "I'll come." She gathered her supplies while Tom waited, his hands twisting his hat into a wrinkled mess. Then she climbed into his wagon, and Caleb followed on horseback. They rode to Tom's house in silence. The boy was in bad shape. His skin was pale and clammy, his breathing labored. Tom's daughter sat beside the bed, tears streaming down her face. Lin Yue moved with calm efficiency. She felt the boy's pulse, examined his eyes and throat, listened to his breathing. Then she began preparing a remedy: willow bark for the fever, elderberry for the infection, something else Caleb didn't recognize. She worked quickly, her hands steady despite the exhaustion Caleb knew she had to be feeling. She stayed through the night, administering the remedy every few hours, bathing the boy's forehead with cool cloths, monitoring his breathing. Caleb stayed too, sitting in the corner watching her work. By dawn, the fever had broken. The boy woke weak and disoriented, but alive. Tom's daughter sobbed with relief. and Tom himself stood in the doorway, watching Lin Yu pack up her supplies, his expression complicated. "Thank you," he said finally. Lin Yu paused. "He'll need rest, and more of this remedy for the next 3 days. I'll bring it by. I'll pay you, whatever you want." "I don't want your money, Mr. Garrett." Tom's jaw worked. "Then what do you want?" Lin Yu looked at him directly. "I want you to stop teaching your grandson that people like me don't belong. I want you to teach him that kindness matters more than the color of someone's skin. Can you do that?" Tom was silent for a long moment, then slowly he nodded. "Yes, I can do that." Lin Yu picked up her bag. "Then we're even." She walked out and Caleb followed. They rode home in the early morning light, neither of them speaking. But when they reached the ranch and Caleb helped her down from the wagon, he saw the tears on her cheeks. "What's wrong?" he asked. "Nothing." She smiled through the tears. "Everything. I didn't think it would feel like this." "Like what?" "Like winning." Caleb pulled her close and held her while she cried. And when she was done, when she'd let out all the fear and exhaustion and relief, they went inside together, shot. The fever passed, the town recovered, and something fundamental had shifted. People still talked, of course. There were still those who disapproved, who would never accept a marriage between a Chinese widow and a white rancher. But the loudest voices had been silenced by the simple fact that Lin Yu had saved their children when no one else could. By fall, her shop was busier than ever. People came not just for remedies, but for advice, for comfort, for someone who would listen without judgment. She expanded her stock, brought in new herbs from suppliers in San Francisco, taught some of the local women how to prepare simple treatments. The ranch thrived too. Caleb hired a hand to help with the heavy work, expanded his herd, repaired the outbuildings. He and Lin Yu worked together in the evenings, planning improvements, dreaming about the future. One night in October, as they sat on the porch watching the sun set over the hills, Lin Yu rested her head on Caleb's shoulder. "I'm pregnant," she said quietly. Caleb went very still. "What?" "I'm pregnant. About 3 months, I think." He turned to face her, his eyes wide. "Are you sure?" She smiled. "I'm a healer, Caleb. I'm sure." Joy flooded through him, so intense it almost hurt. He pulled her into his arms and held her tight, his face buried in her hair. "We're going to have a baby," he whispered. "We are." "Are you scared?" "Terrified," she admitted, "but also happy, so happy." Caleb pulled back to look at her, his hands framing her face. "I love you. I love you so much it scares me. I love you too." They sat together as the light faded, wrapped in each other, dreaming about the child who would come in spring. A child who would grow up knowing that love could cross any boundary, that courage meant choosing each other even when the world said no. That home wasn't a place, but the people you held close. The baby came in April during a rainstorm that drummed against the roof and turned the world outside soft and green. Lin Yu labored through the night with Margaret Hutchins at her side, coaching her through the pain. Caleb paced downstairs, listening to every sound, feeling helpless and terrified. When he finally heard the baby's first cry, strong and furious and alive, he sank into a chair and wept. Margaret came down an hour later, smiling. "You have a daughter, and your wife wants you." Caleb took the stairs 2 at a time. Lin Yue was propped up in bed, exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in soft white cloth. She looked up when he entered, and her smile nearly broke him. "Come meet her," she said. Caleb crossed to the bed and sat carefully beside them. Lin Yue shifted the bundle, and he saw his daughter's face for the first time, red and wrinkled and perfect, her eyes squeezed shut, her tiny fists waving. "She's beautiful," he whispered. "She's ours," Lin Yue said. Caleb reached out and stroked the baby's cheek with one finger. She turned toward the touch instinctively, her mouth opening. "What should we call her?" Lin Yue asked. Caleb thought for a moment. "Sarah," he said quietly, "for my first wife, and May, for your mother. Sarah May Turner." Lin Yu's eyes filled with tears. "It's perfect." They sat together in the quiet, the 3 of them, and Caleb felt something he hadn't felt in years. Not just happiness, not just love, but peace. the bone-deep certainty that he was exactly where he was meant to be. The years that followed weren't easy. There were still hard winters and failed crops and seasons when money was tight. There were still people in Ridgefield who looked at their family with disapproval, who whispered behind their backs, who would never accept what they'd built. But there were also moments of profound joy. Sarah's first steps, taken on the porch, while Caleb cheered and Lin Yue laughed. The day a young woman from town came to Lin Yue asking to apprentice, to learn the healing arts. The night Caleb woke to find Lin Yue standing at the window, watching the stars, and realized she was no longer looking back toward what she'd lost, but forward toward what they'd created. They grew old together, slowly, in the way of people who've earned their years. Lin Yu's hair turned silver, but her hands remained steady. Caleb's back grew stiff, but his heart stayed strong. And their daughter grew into a woman who carried both her parents' strength, her mother's wisdom, and her father's courage. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, they would sit on the porch and remember that first winter, the blizzard that brought them together, the town that tried to tear them apart, the choice they'd made to stand when everyone told them to bend. "Do you ever regret it?" Lin Yue asked once, her hand in his. Caleb looked at her, at the life written in the lines of her face, at the love that had only deepened with time, and shook his head. "Not for a single moment," he said. And he meant it, because in the end what saved them wasn't the town's acceptance or the passage of time or any grand gesture. What saved them was the simple, radical act of choosing each other, of seeing each other fully and refusing to let go. They had built a life from nothing but courage and stubbornness and love. They had taken two lonely hearts and made them whole. They had survived not because the world was kind, but because they had been kind to each other. And that, Caleb thought, as Lin Yue rested her head on his shoulder and the sun sank low over their land, was more than enough. It was everything.